Hi, everyone. I'm here with Alice Feiring, author of Natural Wine for the People. Alice, how are you?
I'm as well as can be expected. I'm healthy and safe. How are you?
I'm all right. So, Alice, what are you drinking these days? Let's start with that.
If I did a spin on this apartment, you'd be shocked how many bottles are just like hanging around. Um, I've had a hard time finding things that I want to drink, but of course, drinking is necessary. The things that are giving me most pleasure are sherries, things
Hmm.
that have some oxidative, nutty, salty qualities, and whether that comes from a wine that has skin contact, so it's a little bit gritty. A wine that is just too pretty feels too fruity, and it clashes against what's going on right now for me.
Hmm.
So yeah, I find sherry is just perfect.
We need that fruity, the optimism of the fruitiness and
Well,
the
no,
and the
the
grit.
opposite. I'm opposite. No, I don't. I don't. I think that sherry is really pretty, but it gives me structure. Like I've had this odd experience during lockdown that wines that are usually savory, and I like savory wines, just seem too fruity, and a wine that's too fruity just seems cloying right now to me.
Hmm.
I want the opposite.
Hmm.
Solid. I've had a very interesting reaction taste-wise to what's going on.
So your tastes have really shifted since
Yeah, I've
all
always
this
loved
happened.
oxidative wines, and I really do love it. But it seems that they're hitting a comfort zone for me right now.
Hmm. So you are a fierce advocate for natural wine.
Fierce.
Um, Fierce. I want to ask you for the uninitiated, can you give us a sort of a working definition? What is natural wine and why is it so important to you?
Natural wine for me starts with organic viticulture, and then there's nothing added, nothing taken away from the grape in the winemaking process. So the way the wine is made, that respect is given to it during the process of winemaking. And then I have to like dial it back a bit for people who are not initiated to let you
Mm.
all know that there are, depending on how you count, 72 or a couple of hundred additives that are perfectly legal that go into conventional winemaking. And so, including, of course, sulfur, which gets basically most of the attention. And so for natural wine, sulfur would be either for nothing, none added, or a little bit. So it's just grape. It's wine made from grape. It's the way wine has been made for centuries until recent memory.
Can you give us an example of, besides sulfur, a particularly egregious additive that we should be worried about?
Gum arabic. Well, I don't like the idea of gum arabic in my ice cream or in my wine. Another one is PVPP, which I can't even. I'd have to go back into the to actually what those chemical abbreviations stand for because I can't pronounce it. But it is a vinyl blah 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 blah. Um, Other added tannins. That's kind
Mm.
of sounds simple, but they could be added from wood tannin, just added back into the grape. There's another one. That is there's some that are carcinogenic. There are allergens like derived from eggs, which may seem like big deal, but there are a lot of. But it's gum arabic and the um, something called Velcorin that is kind of the most degree. Velcorin is added to, and that is the one that is carcinogenous that basically strips out a sheepiness from wine, a little something called a yeast called Brettanomyces that some people don't like. There are things added for color, mega purple, it goes on and on.
Wow. And it seems like the average wine consumer might not know about some of these additives or just be aware.
Most of the average wine consumer think that there is one ingredient in a wine and it is a grape.
Wow.
And of course, yeast. There are hundreds and hundreds of yeasts that are added to start fermentation instead of natural fermentation. And all those yeasts that you can choose affect the color and the aroma of the wine. So basically, what you're drinking is not necessarily the grape, but consider it the additives, uh, the fragrance and flavor suitcase for the wine industry.
So let's get into Jewish wine, and we have to start with, of course, the infamous Manischewitz wine, the great giver of Passover hangovers and many wonderful memories.
Yes, but
Um,
with that, there's also Kedem and Shapiro's, and like so. We just use Manischewitz as a cliche, but there's a whole bunch of them. Carmel.
right.
Yeah.
So how do we relate to these? What do we do with these wines in relation to?
To do with them is to use them to caramelize onions and make vegetarian chopped liver with them. That's my favorite thing to do with them. It really works quite well for caramelizing onions. And in the case of my 95-year-old mother, who is very attached to Kedem Matuk Rouge, soft and naturally sweet wine, haha. I don't want to take that away from her. I just sent her 4 bottles of it because it makes her happy on Shabbos. So, but the whole notion of how Jews lost their taste for wine
Mm,
is complicated. And it's definitely a post-World War II phenomenon.
mm. So you wrote this piece in the New York Times a year ago, and you were talking about the intense difficulty of getting a kosher natural wine.
Yes,
Have there been any updates, developments in your quest?
actually, yes, there is. I thought I was going to be making wine last year. That didn't work out. Now, actually, right before the pandemic hit our consciousness,
Mm,
contacted by a rabbi in Crown Heights who has been making wine since 1983. And Yossi Zakon always, I just said his name as if he was French, but Zakon um, has always thought he made natural wine.
mm,
And he would tell me how he made wine. It was a little screwy, but his heart was about making natural wine. And unbeknownst to me, he's been following me all these years, and he contacted me that I made a natural wine this year. And he sent it to me, and it is from the Finger Lakes, and he really made it native yeast ferment, no sulfur. It
mm,
was organic viticulture, and it broke my heart that he is a talented winemaker, without a doubt. And he did the best he could with these grapes, and it was interesting. The trouble is that the grapes were not that great, and I would love to see him with beautiful grapes. And if I'd love to make wine with him, I'd love to take his skill and take it further into really working with grapes that respect his skill. Anyway, it was the first 0 sulfur natural yeasted natural kosher wine that I ever tasted, and he did quite well with it this year. I turned him on to a couple of stores that were happy to buy some, and he had some other customers, and I think he was greatly encouraged. So yes, very encouraged by that.
so what are some of the roadblocks or difficulties in sort of building out kosher natural wine as an industry, the market? And I mean, it seems like you're very grassroots in developing this yourself or helping others.
Yeah.
So what are your plans for the future? How would you like to see it go?
Well, I do have some plans for the future, though I haven't cemented them. But I'll tell you where I see the only way it can go is that it needs to be a really great wine and accepted by the natural wine community, and by
Mm,
that way getting the attention of the Orthodox Jewish community, that maybe there's something interesting there. The trouble with the people in the Orthodox community right now who are drinking wine, and a lot of people have wine collections, have absolutely no idea about wine and what can be. They don't understand that there's something called natural wine because they um, there's nothing for them to drink. There's nothing that, I mean, they're not going to be reading Eric Asimov in the New York Times, because those wines are not that they'd be drinking.
Right.
They'll be drinking the people who write about kosher wine, and those people are not talking about natural wine. So they have no idea. If they find out, aha, there's this kosher wine that is getting celebrated by the secular community, and we're not drinking it, that is the only way that natural wine is going to infiltrate that community. So I'm hoping to help that along.
It's so interesting. It seems like there's a parallel there to the farm to table movement and leading with taste, that if you make, certain seasonal vegetables taste really good and you create consumer demand, suddenly now you can create a more sustainable kind of cuisine overall.
I think it's actually more similar to Eartha Kitt having to go over to France to get any fame before she found fame back home.
Mm.
And so, because we'd have to even go back further, is there a farm to table? Much of that in the Orthodox Jewish community. I mean, I'm talking super frum.
Right.
So, no, there's not. And I think part of it is because also post World War II and part of the immigrant community, and I don't think we talked about this, and is that there was a disconnect from farming.
Mm.
There was the farming in the 1950s, and that was, connected to socialism and the working community, but no, we lost our connection to the land.
Mm. So in A Seat at the Table, and you started to reference this just a couple of minutes ago, you talk about this Jewish tradition of winemaking, how Jews were, in fact, Ashkenazi Jews in Europe were winemakers. They owned vineyards, they made wine, and that a lot of that tradition got lost in the Holocaust. So I'm sort of curious to hear from you, are there aspects of that tradition? Are there things in the historical record that we can use to recover some of that lost knowledge?
Well, there was some very interesting research going on in Hungary. I think it wrapped up about 2 years ago, when those archives are available, about the history of Jews making wine in one of the most respected countries of the world at the time. And Tokaj was extremely famous, and Hungarian wine was extremely famous. And it's so that I think history is preserved there. I'd love to see it go further. And I started thinking about recently, Slovakia is coming back, and Czechoslovakia. There's a huge, the oldest Jewish winery, I think, is traced back to the 1400s to Prague. Now, I don't know anything about the Moravian Jews back then. There is reclamation to be done. I don't know if anybody's doing it outside of Hungary. Austria, I mean, when you think about what happened to all those Austrian vineyards? What happened to the Moselle? A friend of mine had done a little bit of snooping around in Franken for me. But there is, if somebody wants to take that on, I feel crippled by my lack of other languages to do original research in this matter. But I think it needs to be done before it's gone.
So Hungarian, German, Yiddish, I would imagine, some Russian perhaps.
Yeah, Yiddish and Russian and Slovakian and Moldovan. It would also, I'm sure actually that there was such, I don't know about the Georgian Jewish community. I imagine, yes, we'd have to go back to the 20s for that research of that, though, because of communism.
Well, Alice, I think we need to assemble a task force.
I think so too.
And solicit your help on this,
yes.
And see what we can do to recover some of this lost natural winemaking tradition.
Yes, I'd love to.
So your lecture in A Seat at the Table is really wonderful, all about the history of winemaking in Jewish tradition and the Jewish relationship to wine. It's quite fascinating, and I'm so grateful you were able to join us for the class and you're able to talk with us today. If people haven't signed up yet for See the Table, they can check out yivo.org/food. You can learn from knowledgeable folks like Alice and many others. And Alice, I hope we'll have a chance to talk soon about wine and taste some natural wine.
Yes. Let's do that.
Thank you so much, Alice.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Take care.